So you have Bitcoin consolidating at 85K while exchange volume is hitting fresh lows, and at the same time, you've got China going all in on gold. So what's really going on in these markets? Well, today we're going to break it down. So one of the big talks this week was about Powell looking to obviously hold his stance going into the next Fed meeting in, I think it's 16 days. And you can see Trump had a response here on Truth Social, where he commented on England cutting their rates for the 7th time, while Powell is still holding his stance, and Trump believes that it's the wrong thing to do. More so, Trump just wants the rates cut. That's basically the height of it. He's even threatened earlier this week that if he wants Jerome Powell gone, he will be gone. Powell replied that he doesn't plan to leave, and he won't leave if he gets asked to leave. So you've got a bit of conflict there. They're going kind of head to head on their opinions, and it looks like the people are pricing in a pause. They're not expecting a cut. This has moved up and down a little bit throughout the last month, but we're sitting at a 12% chance now of getting a cut. So you can see 87% chance that it's just going to stay where it is. We do have some data coming out later this week. So we've got flash PMI manufacturing, and then we got flash services on Wednesday, and then on Thursday you've got unemployment rate for the USA. We also have flash manufacturing PMI for Europe and Great Britain, and flash services PMI coming out all on Wednesday. So looking ahead at this week, the big day is going to be Wednesday. This is definitely a day where you're going to see some volatility in the markets, so bear that in mind. But we are on a holiday this week, so Monday, and then nothing on Tuesday. So that's what you have coming up. Bear that in mind if you're trading these markets. Looking then at just the liquidations. So not much activity, not much volume with it being the Easter holidays. You can see liquidations. It was probably a week or 10 days since we had that real liquidation event there. And yet we've had a drop-off in volume, drop-off in liquidations. But one thing I do want to point out is, a big thing. I've just seen this article on the crypto exchange volume falls to 6-month low as traders flee spot for futures. So you're getting a lot less people buying at the current level, and we can see that on the chart here with the volume dropping off. So one thing I do want to point out, I don't think this is anything to worry about. Obviously one thing we're looking out for when we're analyzing this is for us to get a higher high and a higher low put in. That would be ideal. So you can see where we're currently at, we are putting in a new fresh low. But if we take a look at the last time Bitcoin was at a low, so we're looking at the August 5th low that came off the carry trade when the Bank of Japan hiked their rates. If we look, that was just around the end of July, and Bitcoin found its low on the 5th of August. So the 5th of August was right around here where volume started to creep up, and you had that big spike in volume, and that was that capitulation event, lots of selling happening, and then we actually continued lower after the Bitcoin low was put in. We put in our low on the volume, the exchange volume, on the 22nd of August. So that's about 13 days after the actual Bitcoin low. Then we actually ended up having a double bottom where volume dropped off again, and that was on the 5th of September, so exactly 1 month from the Bitcoin low. So if we hop over to the Bitcoin chart, I've got this marked off on the chart, so you can see here, we'll zoom in a little. Bitcoin, this capitulation event here off the carry trade, with that big spike in volume right here, that is on the 5th of August. And then the exchange volume low was on the 22nd of August. Bitcoin was at a much higher price. It dropped down to 49k, and on the day the exchange volume hit its low, it was at 60k. And then the exchange volume put in the double bottom. That was on the 5th of September, so in around here. And at that time, Bitcoin was trading around 56k, so still up considerably from its low. So, this drop in exchange volume that we're seeing right now, this low that's been put in, doesn't necessarily mean that Bitcoin has to go lower. So if we look at what that looks like on the current chart, Bitcoin put in its low here, it's just above 74k, and that was on the 7th of April. We had a bit of a double bottom a couple of days later, on the 9th. And basically, we've pushed up to that point, and now the exchange volume today has put in a new low, and that is 13 days after the low. So again, just to recap, we look back, the low on Bitcoin price to the low on the exchange volume was 17 days, but when the exchange volume put in its low, Bitcoin never revisited its lows again from that point and just continued to push up. So, that's not to say that the exchange volume can't drop lower, but the level we're currently at is 32 billion. So we're almost back at those August, September lows, which were at around the 28 billion mark. So that's one thing to keep an eye on. Obviously, when the exchange volume starts to pick up again, we start putting in some higher lows and higher highs. That's going to signal some strength in the market, some spot buyers coming back in, picking up the Bitcoin. What I think needs to happen for that is, if Bitcoin, the price action can put in a higher high, above 88k and starts to get into that 92, 93k level with a few daily closes, I think confidence is going to come back into the market and people are going to be willing to pick up spot. Where we're currently at, from a trading perspective, it's higher risk. It might be higher reward to buy Bitcoin now, or in the 70s, but it carries some risk because it can go a lot lower. Whereas once the trend reverses, it's actually safer to buy at a higher price, and continue to ride out from that point on than to try and catch a falling knife. So I think, in the coming weeks, if Bitcoin can get that push up, you're actually going to see a spike in the exchange volume, which could start to put in those higher highs. So while we're on the chart here, just looking at Bitcoin, one thing I do want to talk about is obviously the current price action. So we're going to flip to the 4-hour chart here, and we have been consolidating now for a good few days, basically a week. So we've had a whole week of ranging after a nice push from the double bottom that we had. There's no denying that this looks bullish, but as we can see from the exchange volume, a lot of this move has been from futures trading and not so much spot buying. So when you have futures holding up the market, it's never a good sign. But like I mentioned, if Bitcoin does decide to break out from this point and this pennant that we're in right now, and the next move is up, looking at this pennant, if we were to take it off the low, and we were to, get a move out, it would tick Bitcoin up into that 92 to 93k area, and I think that's where spot will come in. I think maybe you'll get a pullback, pull back into some kind of demand, and you're going to see a lot of spot buyers step in at that point, because we have at that point confirmed a higher high. So if we look at the overall trend here, you can see that Bitcoin has been finding resistance off this trend line and has now broke above. We actually had a very clean retest of this trend line. So I think that is also going to give people some more confidence. The fact that we did come down, we had a pullback, and buyers stepped in on the trend line. So this coming week, if we were to get some good news, I could see us push higher before we actually come down. And then at that point, you would imagine that we will come down to put in a higher low. And that will be a confirmation of the trend flipping. So that's my thoughts. I am watching this pennant for a break to either side. I'm not saying that it has to go up, even though it does look bullish. You're getting into this consolidation. There was an impulse move up, consolidating sideways, and then hopefully a continuation higher, but not ruling out a drop this week. Again, we're in a time where the news and the fundamentals are heavily impacting price. So if we were to pull back, I do believe that we will get a higher low. I'm quite confident that this 74 area is going to hold. This is a strong double bottom. So my area of interest here is marked out in this green area. So, basically 80k to 78.5 is my area of interest. But again, like I mentioned before, as a trader or an investor, it is important that you do have the confirmation. It's much better if we look back here at previous price action. During this time, huge accumulation. There was a lot of people accumulating Bitcoin, but your real confirmation, even though you had a low, higher, high, higher low, another high, higher low. Your real confirmation wasn't until we broke the March high on this, but you did have a trend line, and you did get a perfect retest right before the election, and then the election pump happened. So worth pointing out. And one thing on the higher time frame, if we just flip to the daily, that I want to point out is, you've also got these tops from last cycle, and they actually held price up when we did push past 100. They held up really well. So coming back up into that is going to be an area of resistance when we do make contact with that. And if we look at last cycle and how it played out, you can see on the first move up, we zoom in a little bit, there was, pretty decent volume on that first high right here. You can see the volume at the bottom, and then volume picked up a little bit, didn't quite make it to the same levels, and then we had a sell-off, huge capitulation that marked the low, and then kind of bled out a little bit. But one thing to watch out for is a push to a high or a new all-time high or equal high on low volume. Realistically, for this move here in Bitcoin to be sustained, to show that it wants to go higher and put in, higher highs beyond the previous all-time high, we really need increased volume to step in as we push through these highs. So that's one thing I will be watching for, if Bitcoin does start to rally higher, is basically we had a lot of volume in around the ETF, and we did have a nice volume step in when we cleared 100k. So realistically, we're looking, the next time we approach 100k, we want to see equal to or more volume stepping in, and that would suggest that Bitcoin can go take out these highs and continue higher. So another chart I just want to go through is the US dollar dominance. I've got USDT and USDC here, and I've marked out my Elliott wave, and it does look like it's breaking down, which is overall good for the crypto market. We've got, for me, the next key support, I'm looking at the daily here, is around this 7.27% mark. That's my area of interest to see a possible bounce. So that would relate, or translate into an overall pullback in the crypto market. So continuing, back to Bitcoin here, Bitcoin was to break out of this pennant and rally up into the 90, 91, 92 area, that would translate with the dollar dominance coming down to probably around this 7.3, 7.2 level. And at that point, Bitcoin could then pull back, causing a spike in the dollar dominance chart. Now, if this was to play out, I'm not saying it is, but it's just an idea at this point. If it was, it would be forming a bit of a head and shoulders. You can see here that this 3 would be the left shoulder, 5 would be the head, and then if we do test this and get a bounce, this previous support, then we would probably be putting in a right shoulder, which could be just to this the 8% level, but if it was to come up level with the left shoulder, we would be looking at about 8.2, which would be quite a severe pullback on alts and Bitcoin. So something to keep an eye out. And then we would probably be creating some kind of stronger trend line at that point. And then you could just watch this trend line form, and that would help you guide you through your trades. Another thing that I mentioned right at the start was how China have been buying up a lot of gold. So we can see here that China's central bank increased its gold holdings by 5 tons in March, posting their 5th consecutive monthly purchase. This brings the total China gold reserve to a record 2,292 tons. China's gold holdings are now reflect 6.5% of its total official reserved assets. But you can see here Goldman Sachs pointed out that China actually purchased 50 tons of gold in February, and that's 10 times more than what they officially reported. So who knows how much they actually purchased. It states here 5 tons in March, but obviously we can look at gold's price here and it is just skyrocketing. So yeah, I mean, gold had a small pullback along with the stock market and crypto, which was probably, I think it was a 5% pullback from the high. 6.6% it pulled back when there was a lot of fear there a couple of weeks ago, and since has just pushed to new all-time highs, and it's been basically up only. You can see it had a very clean breakout, tested this resistance once, twice, 3, 4 times, and then consolidated and pushed above, and then from that point on it's never looked back. So gold's looking strong. If Bitcoin could even get a small portion of that market cap, it would see a huge rally. And personally, I am bullish overall on Bitcoin going into the rest of this year. I think that all we need is for the United States to suggest or actually confirm that they are going to buy Bitcoin, and I think you're going to see a very rapid drive up in price. So for anyone that is trading Bitcoin, I do think you need to be careful shorting. Make sure you've got a stop loss in there, because I do predict that we're going to see quite an aggressive move sometime in the next 4 to 6 months, and just I would advise that you don't try and hold any shorts without a stop loss. So that's it for me today. If you've got any questions, fire them down in the comments section below, and if you like this market update, please like, subscribe, it helps the channel out, and I'll see you in the next one.